Hey folks, so Captain Paul here, and today we're at the helm of Southern Estate, one of my favorite places to be, as you know. Just a fantastic week. I got to share this little bitty. Last night I was driving my boat. I was driving the Woodson actually, and I had this little electric storm last night. It was like way off in the estuary, and I got a little picture of this, the lightning hitting the ground. It was actually pretty cool, or hitting the water, actually very, very cool. Anyway, I also want to say thanks to Patreons, thanks to everybody that watches the channel and pays attention. I know I've really touched a niche. Today we're going to talk about fuel tanks. I want to go over a little bit on these fuel tanks, especially on these 40-year-old trawlers, because we'll go over it here in a minute on the video. But before I do it, I just want to say special thanks to Mike, Larry, Scott, Mike, Jim, Cochran. Thank all you guys, because the channel just doesn't exist without you guys. I just appreciate it so much, and there's so many more names that I should be bringing up here, like Steve, Bill, Jim, John. I'm going to go this week also. I'm thinking I'm going actually tomorrow, Tuesday and Wednesday. We're going to go look at re-look at the Grand Banks. We're going to re-look at the Bayliner, and then I have a new boat. Especially for you guys, you really need to follow the channel, because this is a boat I may already have a buyer for it, and it just came up at the last minute. Somebody called me, and it was an unfortunate situation of one of our channel followers is health reasons, and so I think he may have to sell the boat. And I'm going to go look at it to see what kind of condition it is and stuff like that. It's an 89 43-foot Alvin, so I'm excited about to go and see that. So I'm going to take a special trip over there this week and see it. So today, one thing I really want to talk about with these fuel tanks, last week we talked about why you may need a brokerage and why you have to put money into the escrow account, and why you should never give money to a private seller. You should not, more than a $500 deposit should not be given. And today we're going to talk about fuel tanks. And when you're buying one of these older boats, it's one of the issues. I don't really have to deal with it with Southern Estate, but I do in a way, because even my fuel tanks that I have on here, which are about 15 years old on Southern Estate, they have been replaced, and we'll go over that here in just a minute. But one of my tanks does need to be polished. The fuel needs to be polished in it, and when they re-put the new tanks in this boat, it's set up to where you can't, the polisher doesn't have any access to the tank, and I want to go over that with you, especially you guys out there looking for the boats, and show you what I mean by that. First of all, I want to take you out on the deck here, though, and go over a few things. And after that, then I'll come back in here and I'll expose. Actually, I can go to the, I got an access port right here. I'll show you the top of my tank. But once I go out here, I'll explain to you why the tanks, what happens to these tanks, and what really takes these tanks out. So I want to show you right here. This is my side deck on Southern Estate right here. And on my side deck here, typically this is all, especially on one of these older trawlers here, you can see like this Grand Banks right here. You can see the teak going down the side decks right there. And I know that those decks are screwed down. So what happens is the holes, when the teak is screwed down, it goes inside this fiberglass right here. And then inside that fiberglass, eventually moisture will get through there, and then it leaks on top of the tanks. And that's usually what takes out the tanks. So, and the reason why this is so important, though, that's where I fill my tank up. But my actual tank sits right about here, let's say. So there's like and I'll take you down and show it to you, and it's why I can't have my fuel polished on this boat. But this boat right here, when I bought it, it had fuel tanks installed, and all of this teak decking has been removed, so I don't have to deal with the moisture from the screws, and that's one less thing that I have to worry about on my tanks. Okay, so what I really want to show you guys right here, this is the back side of my fuel tank right here. So it's a big, about 250-gallon fuel tank, and where my problem is this guy right here. That's my fill valve. So you saw that out on the deck. So it comes down here, and then it curves, and it does a 90-degree, and then goes back into the tank. And that's what screws me. If that, when you're looking to purchase a boat, if that comes straight down into the tank, which they typically do, then you don't have the problem I have. Like, he can't get his hose in there to remove the fuel, so we have to come out of an access port. Well, in this particular tank, I don't have any access ports. I do. It's inside of a cabinet, so I have to remove that cabinet. So I haven't been able to get the fuel polished in that, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes here. but I just wanted to come down here and show you, especially you guys out there looking for boats. If your fuel comes, if this line right here came straight down into the tank, I would have no problem. But because it comes straight down and then it does a 90 into the tank, they can't get their hard hose in there to clean the fuel. So that's a problem. And it was just a bad design from the original owners. I'm not going to complain because I have newer fuel tanks here, but and in the same token, I can't really polish this fuel, and the fuel in this tank actually needs to be polished. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So on this side of Southern Estates, so this is my starboard tank, the one we just went looked at on the outside of the deck. And on the inside, on the other one, we went to the port side over there and showed you the tank. But I have this access panel right here. So I just take those bolts off right there. Then I can pull this off right here, and I can get to my fuel pretty easy. Now, if this tank was rotted out, you could tell real easily, because the top of these tanks will be all rusted out and stuff like that. I've actually seen some with just a little bit of surface rust on them that I didn't think was going to pass inspection. But after a tank inspection guy looked at the tank, he actually signed off on the tank. So a little bit of surface rust on the top isn't going to hurt anything. It's when they, especially on some of those older tanks. I had a Grand Banks last year that did it. But I just wanted to kind of show you this access. This is also how we, I just pull this, I pull this little guy right here, and that's how I can stick this tank right here. But this access port on my port side is a little more complicated. So on the port side of Southern Estate, that access panel for the top of the fuel tank is inside this cabinet. So, you have to remove this lid right here. Also, the air conditioner sits in here. I'll show you. And so you see the air conditioning unit, which is an old unit that we're going to remove and replace anyway. And then right over there, see right here, this is my access port for the top of this tank right here. But you can see it's very complicated to get to, and the guy that polishes the fuel, he can't get his equipment inside there. So we'd have to remove this top of this cabinet, or when we go to remodel the boat, we're just going to remove this cabinet altogether. We're going to remove this air conditioner right here, and then that should give us access to this tank right here, and then I can go and which I will have this fuel polished right here. But you can also see another problem here is, see this flooring right here? Somehow I've got to build a hatch for the top of that when we do this little remodel, so that it all matches, if that makes sense. But anyway, I just wanted to show you guys that, because these are all things that you should be looking at when you're purchasing a boat. Where do you get access to your fuel tanks, and how do you get to your fuel tanks? And on my port side here, it's a lot more complicated than the starboard side. A little bit of tour of my fuel tanks here on Southern Estate. Now again, these tanks were replaced about 15 years ago now. When we bought the boat, they were about 13 years old. Now they're about 15 years old. So we should be good for another, I don't know. Typically, if you read the blogs, they'll say 20 years. Aluminum tanks are good for 20 years. You guys don't know how many times I've pulled up on a boat and seen like an aluminum tank. So you guys that are looking at these, like let's say Carvers or Bayliners or these older boats with aluminum tanks are good for about 20 years. And what happens is, it's the welds that'll, the fuel will find its way through the weld. And it's not a fast leak or anything like that. You could stick a pad under there and you could probably manage it for a little while just by using oil pads or fuel pads to soak up the fuel that's coming out, because it's going to be a very, very slow drip. But you don't want to do that. You can't sell the boat with leaky fuel tanks. It's impossible. So you guys, my point to this whole thing is, if you're looking at one of these older Bayliners, let's say 30, 40 years old, more than likely, if the fuel tanks haven't been replaced, at some point they're gonna need to be replaced. Steel tanks, you can go a little bit longer on. I don't know I can't tell anybody, and maybe somebody in the comments can tell us, what's the life expectancy of a steel tank? Because I think if a steel tank is properly taken care of, they can actually go a lot longer than aluminum tanks. And I don't know, because I've seen 40-year-old aluminum tanks that have passed inspections for another 10 years. And so let's talk about that real quick, because it's not just keeping your fuel clean that matters. Keeping clean fuel in your boat eliminates odors, and it makes your boat run cooler, and it keeps the filters and injectors and everything from plugging up. So it's just a good idea and good practice to keep clean fuel in your boat, and that's why I'm that's one of the negatives to Southern Estate is I don't have an easy access to have my fuel polished. If I did, I would have my fuel polished, and I'm going to have my fuel polished when we do this next remodel and that cabinet gets removed there. I am going to have a fuel polisher come out and polish the fuel in these tanks, even though my fuel is pretty recent. But down underneath here, the reason I know this is because on my generator with my ray core, I have to change my ray core out about every 65, 75 hours. And that's just because it's getting something in there. I think that my pickup tube is really low in the tank. It's picking something up, and it clogs my ray core after about 65, 70 hours. It'll clog up that ray core, and I'll have to change that ray core to keep it running. But if I had the fuel polished, that means pulling all the sediment, all the anything that's in there out of there. Also pulls the moisture out of the tank and stuff like that. And there's two different kind of tanks. So when you're buying one of these older boats, you can have an actual tank survey. So this is a company like American Clean Diesel, I believe. They're in Foley, Alabama. They will come out. They will pull all of the fuel out of the boat. They'll go into the tank. They'll pull the inspection plates off of the tank. They go in there. They scrub the tanks out. They give you an inside look at the tanks, make sure there's no rust in there from moisture. A big thing, especially you guys that have boats, not necessarily here in Florida, but up, let's say, Canada and these colder places. If you don't keep full tanks of fuel in your boat, the condensation will rust your tanks out from the inside out, not just from the top of the tank. So there's a lot of different places and a lot of different ways fuel tanks can get hurt. The best practice for your fuel tanks is having your fuel tanks full all the time. If you have your fuel tanks full, there's less condensation, no moisture in your tanks, so you don't have to worry about rust there. Also, like my particular tanks are steel, but they're also ceramic coated on the inside. So it's another protection against moisture and rust and stuff like that. And the only reason I know that is because the people that we bought the boat from said that they were ceramic sealed inside the tanks. So it's just, like I said, another protection. And that's usually, I think that's on more modern day steel tanks that they'll do that. I've also read blogs where you got to be careful of that, because what will happen is if that ceramic starts to deteriorate over years, that's what also could be plugging up filters and stuff like that. So you got to be careful with that kind of stuff too. I would say, I talked to quite a few of you. There's a couple of deals going on right now, and some of these are on the older trawlers. And if you wake up in the middle of the night with night sweats over fuel tank issues, you can spend, and it's not cheap. I think American Fuel just quoted a boat. It was like $5,000, but that's pulling the inspection. That's an actual, a fuel tank survey. Where they pull the inspection plates, they actually look inside. There's not just cleaning and polishing the fuel. There's a difference in that. That typically costs around, every time I've done it, it's been right around, it seems like that $1,500 to $2,000 price range to do that. And then to do an actual tank inspection costs a little bit more, because it's a little more labor intense, where they open up the tanks, actually go physically inside the tanks. And another thing that I could do to Southern Estate here is I can literally cut access ports inside my tanks. I've got to lower the fuel level in the tanks and then cut access ports inside there, and then install those onto the current tanks that I have right here. And it may be something I may have to do, but I think I'm going to have plenty of access on the top of this port tank once I get that cabinet removed and stuff like that. So I'm not too worried about that. Anyway, it's just a quick video here. This week, and it's just something, I know it's really isolated, really talking, probably not gonna get a lot of hits on it, but for you guys out here looking at one of these 40-year-old trawlers, and fuel tanks are concerned for you, just remember, just like you survey the boat, a good surveyor will come, he'll kind of inspect the tanks, and he'll kind of look at it, and then he'll recommend, say, hey, this boat needs to be, you need a fuel tank survey on the boat. He'll recommend that right in his survey. Maybe not, you know, if the tanks look good and stuff like that, and he may just sign off on them. But again, he's not looking at the inside of your fuel tanks, so he would not know about any rust or anything like that inside your fuel tanks. That's when it really, you know, you got to get down there with a camera, or you know, that type of inspection. And the inspection that costs $5,000, they come out and they remove all. They'll have a portable tank system out on the outside of the boat. And then they remove all the fuel out of that tank, and so then the tank is empty. And then they go in there, they inspect the tank, scrub it out, and then polish your fuel and put it back in the tank. A regular polisher would just have a hose thing. It's like a hard hose thing, and then they push that all around inside the tank there, and they kind of use pressure and stuff like that to clean all of the inside of the tank out. But that type of inspection is a little bit less labor intense and a little bit easier than the other type of inspection. So it's typically a little bit less money. And so just wanted to kind of explain that and clear that up for you. But anyway, like I said, you guys looking for the boats, you know, especially some of these older boats. I think Larry's looking at an older Chris Craft, you know, fuel tanks are going to be an issue. We're the Bayliner that Steve just bought. One of the fuel tanks was leaking, and the current owner had to, before we can even go any further on the survey, he had to go out and have new fuel tanks made. These are aluminum fuel tanks, and then have them reinstalled in the boat. So it kind of held up the survey of that particular boat. But when you're dealing, again, aluminum tanks, 20 years, steel tanks, again, I don't know. And I want to hear you guys' comments about this too, because, you know, I'm not an expert at fuel tanks, but I know what I've owned. I've owned nothing but steel tanks. On my first trawler, I had black iron fuel tanks. Typically, I wouldn't say so much that we're going to see black iron fuel tanks, because by now they should have all been replaced. Those are another 20-year tank. Compared to like a regular steel tank, they'll last a little bit longer than the black iron. Black iron was, that's what I had in my CHB, and you know, again, if you take care of them, and as long as you don't get any rust on them, you know, I don't know how long even a black iron tank. Maybe somebody in the comments could help us out with that. I would imagine, what I've been told and what I've Googled, that a black iron tank, or the same thing with the aluminum tanks, about 20 years, then you'd have to replace them. But a full-blown steel tank, especially with like a ceramic coatings and coatings on the outside, I don't know how long those tanks could last. I think they could last quite a while, though. The last ones I did last year, a couple of them that I surveyed, and actually had to pay a survey company to do the fuel tanks, and both of them were with the American Diesel Company in Foley, Alabama. Both of those tanks, one had service rust up on top a little bit. We were concerned that it wasn't going to pass this inspection, but it did fine. And the other one, the tanks looked like the day that the boat was purchased, and that was no problem having that one signed off. And those were both vintage Grand Bankses, about 90, I think they were both like 82, 83, 84, somewhere right around there that year. And like I said, both fuel tanks checked out. He signed off on them, good for about 10 years. Anyway, guys, you got any comments, please leave them. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe, share it with your friends. You know, I can't say thank you enough to the Patreons and all the support on the channel. I do appreciate it. Anybody coming this way down to the Keys, man, make sure you stop by and say hi. We do appreciate that, and appreciate you guys' time, and the guys that do that, like Gary, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. Anyway, keep an eye out for the shorts coming out for these videos. I'll do a couple little short videos of the walkthroughs of the Grand Banks, the Albin 43, and the Bayliner, the one that you guys have already seen the videos, but I just want to go back out, touch base with the owners, and see where we're at, and just kind of get a feel for the market and stuff like that. Anyway, peace out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Bye.